afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Danielle Bethel, and I have the distinct honor of representing Robert Ramirez, the plaintiff in this matter. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about how far is too far and how much force is acceptable for a police officer to use against a civilian. Let me tell you a little bit about my client, Bobby. Bobby's a local boy. He went to high school right down the road here. He met his high school sweetheart, Maria, and they were married about 8 years ago. They have one son together, and Bobby takes great pride in providing for his family. He works a very physically demanding job in the construction industry, hanging drywall. And all in all, he's a fun-loving guy who loves to go out and have fun with his friends, play ball with his son, and spend time with his wife. On the night of December 7th, 1996, Bobby's path crossed with the paths of two Chicago Police Department officers, Officers Waldman and Levy. And on that night, Bobby was shot in the back by Officer Waldman. And so the issue is going to be for you to decide, using all the facts in the case, whether or not Officer Waldman was justified in shooting Bobby in the back and changing his life and his quality of life forever. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Officer Waldman. Officer Waldman is a 26-year veteran of the police force, having worked in no fewer than 6 different departments. And this is Officer Waldman's 3rd time being accused of using excessive force in the line of duty. Knowing that, the City of Chicago Police Department decided to go ahead and hire Officer Waldman. And it's also important to note that on the night in question, Officer Waldman was not wearing a uniform, was not wearing a badge, and he and Officer Levy were not in a marked patrol car. They were in an unmarked car. So in order for you to decide whether or not Officer Waldman used excessive force, we're going to have to present evidence so that you can consider all the circumstances and make that decision. And what you're going to hear is that Bobby had worked a long week providing for his family. It was Saturday night. He decided that he wanted to go out with his friends. They're Bulls fans, so they went to a buddy's house and watched a Bulls game. After the Bulls game, he played a game of cards with his buddies, and then they went out and they went to a bar and had a couple of drinks. Then they went to another local bar and had a couple more drinks, and this is all over the span of several hours. And they got into a friendly discussion about who was the fastest, because these are all guys that played on the same softball team together. And so they decided to settle the bet, and they went down to a local park where they had a foot race, and Bobby won that foot race. And so he was feeling pretty good by the time it was time to go home. And he got in his car and started on his way home to home to his family. And on the way home, he came across the unmarked police car of Officer Waldman and Officer Levy. And the defendant officers were traveling at a very slow rate of speed, and so Bobby tried to pass them, not knowing that they were officers. And as he tried to pass Officers Waldman and Levy on the left, the officers also went out to the left in front of him and stopped him from passing. So he got back into his lane, and then he tried again, and again he was stopped from passing, and he got angry. And so the 3rd time he tried to pass them, they allowed him, and rather than passing them, he did drive parallel to them, and he ended up getting into a shouting match with Officer Levy, who was driving the unmarked police car. The 2 vehicles stopped. Officer Levy and Robert got out of their vehicles. They continued to argue verbally. They got into a physical altercation, and that physical altercation came to blows, and they ended up on the ground. It was only at this point that the officers made themselves known to Bobby to be police officers. And so once Bobby found out that they were police officers, he stopped fighting. And he did ask for identification. And as he tried to get up, Bobby was shot. He was shot in the back, changing his life forever. Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear evidence that Bobby had a knife, and we dispute this evidence. As a carpenter, Bobby did carry a knife in his toolbox in the back of his car. But the knife that was recovered on the scene is a jackknife and not a carpenter's knife. Further, that knife has no fingerprints on it. It has no blood on it. And both officers have testified that the assailant, Bobby, had the knife and attempted to stab Officer Levy, and in fact did stab Officer Levy with his right hand. But ladies and gentlemen, Bobby is left-handed, not right-handed. So we have inconsistent testimony. Further, the shirt that Officer Levy was wearing on the night in question has never been produced. And so we don't have that piece of evidence showing the alleged stabbing, the knife going through the shirt and into Officer Levy. And the wound that Officer Levy was treated for was really merely a cut and was treated with essentially what amounts to be a Band-Aid. You're going to hear evidence that Bobby was drinking, and we don't dispute that he was drinking. And you, as the jury, are going to have to decide, based on all these facts, how much is too much. Was shooting Bobby in the back an appropriate remedy for the fight, the altercation that Bobby and Officer Levy had gotten into? And you're going to hear evidence that the Chicago Police Department says, and in fact, the officers that are the defendants in this action were trained that use of deadly force is only okay as a last resort, and only if the officer reasonably believes that his life or somebody else's life is in danger. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you'll have the opportunity to hear all this evidence, and you're going to have to make a decision. How much is too much? Was it reasonable for Officer Waldman to shoot Bobby in the back, changing his life forever, based on the evidence? And we submit that it was not reasonable, that Officer Waldman abused his power, and that you should find for our client and find the City of Chicago, Officer Waldman and Officer Levy liable for Bobby's injuries, awarding him $200,000 to recompense him. Thank you.